Well, welcome to the Lamoille North Modified Unified Union School District, February 15th, 2021 Annual Meeting Information Meeting. For our welcome start, first we want to let people know this informational meeting is being recorded. If you're not able to attend all the way through, you will be able to review a recording at your leisure later. Please mute your mic or phone while listening. There often can be reverberation, which can be quite disruptive during a meeting. We'll go through a couple of steps later on how to do that on the Google Meets. There will be opportunities throughout this presentation for related questions and an open Q&A at the end of the presentation. But as I cannot see anybody or any of the meeting particulars, Michelle Lamond will be directing questions to me. So please use the chat or raise hand feature to express your questions. A couple of tips on your reception. If your reception seems to be spotty, particularly with the storm out, turning your camera off uses a little less bandwidth. That's why you can't see me right now. I want to be sure you can hear me and see these slides. And sometimes leaving the meeting and rejoining can help improve your connection. There will be a second information meeting next Monday on February 22nd at 6 p.m. as well. And this link is available on the LNSU homepage. So a quick how-to. Hopefully your screen looks similar to this, only you've got the slides up in front of you. Up in the right-hand corner of the meeting, you should see a sort of a text box. You click on this, and to the right, a menu will pop up, or a right-hand bar, in which you will see people's texts. At the bottom of the right-hand bar, there's a place where you can type in any questions you have that Michelle may be able to get to me later. At the bottom is a menu. It's not always there. Sometimes you have to drag your mouse towards the bottom of the screen for it to pop up. You'll find an icon of your mic, which is where you can mute your mic. You'll find an icon of your camera, which is where you can turn your camera off, but you'll still be able to hear. The raise hand feature is also here. If you want to raise a hand to ask a question later on, you would unmute your mic and raise your hand. These three dots way over to the right on the bottom menu is where you can change your view to maybe see more people or see fewer people. And I think those are the primary key elements to the Google Meets if you're logged in on the internet. So this virtual annual meeting, I wanted to take a minute to touch base on why this format is being used this year. In response to COVID-19 safety concerns, and under H48 and Act 162, the school board determined that it would be safest to hold the 2021 annual meeting in this virtual format, combined with transacting the usual annual meeting business via Australian ballot on March 2nd. This is a one-time act that the legislature passed in direct response to COVID-19 safety concerns, allowing municipal boards and other boards to vote at the board level to have what is usually a voice vote or a floor vote completed through Australian ballot this year and this year only. This won't be repeated next year unless we're still in the same circumstance. I just wanted to be clear that this is an act, again, that the legislature allowed. Usually moving voice vote to Australian ballot is the voters themselves who make that decision, and it happens a year later. This year, the legislature gave that authority to school boards and municipal boards. Tonight, and again at the informational meeting on February 22nd, we are happy with the opportunity to walk you through the reports of the Modified Unified Union School District and the articles you are being asked to vote on. At this point, I would like to turn the mic over to our superintendent, Catherine Gallagher for some quick introductions.
Thank you, Deb. I will start with you, Deb. Greetings, everyone, and thank you for being with us tonight. Deborah Clark is our business manager. I am here to help support the budget and the information given tonight. We have representation from our elementary schools, from our secondary schools, from our technical center and career center, from facilities, from IT, and we have a wonderful, wonderful representation from our board. So thank you for being here, and thank you for those of you who are public, part of the public, for being here as well. As Deb stated, this is a most unusual year, and we are fortunate to be able to have the ability to meet with you in this way. I know that it's been difficult for some of my sister supervisory unions to do this because of their bandwidth issues, and I'm very happy that all of you are here tonight. You will hear a lot of information tonight that will again be repeated a week from this evening, and Deb touched on that. But here are the broad strokes. Basically, we are level funded when it comes to education spending. So keep that in mind. That's sort of the broad picture. We are not looking at a huge increase at all. Some of the drivers, you will see that healthcare costs are high. And that is across the board vis-a-vis last year. And you will see some information about our average daily membership. We have been given the flexibility, or not the flexibility, this is sort of a one-time deal. Our average daily membership is going to be what our membership was a year ago, and that's because we are in the middle of COVID, and that helps us keep the equalized student spending down. So we do have a number of students who are homeschooling this year, and we have and that is the right of anybody who chooses to do that. So we will not be penalized because of that. And our hope is that when things return to a more normal environment, that those students will choose to return to in-person learning at our schools. So with that, I would turn this back over to Deb, and thank you again very much for being here tonight.
So Article 1 is to hear the reports of the Modified Unified Union School District that are included in the annual report of the district board, pages 16 through 37. Notice of the report availability was mailed to district households January 7th. The mailing of the postcard is the second year that we're doing this. In 2019, the annual meeting assembly voted to use a postcard rather than mailing every household an annual report, which was relatively expensive. The annual report, if you would like a hard copy, is available upon request at the Supervisory Union Central Office, at town clerk offices, and online at lnsu.org. The annual report has the questions and answers and budget and tax rate analysis covered in pages 16 through 23. I'm going to start touching the subject that, as Kat noted, the equalized pupil counts have been, by the legislature, are being controlled this year because of COVID, and these numbers came to us late after publication of the reports themselves. So the estimated rates have decreased since the reports were published in January, but I want to be clear that the budgets have not changed. Just the estimated tax rates and just the equalized pupil numbers, and also the yield numbers that we'll talk about a little bit more. Again, the budgets that are in the annual report are the same budgets you're seeing tonight. Fiscal year 22 budgets are reported on pages 24 through 32 and discussed further in this presentation. The audited June 30, 2020 Treasurer's Report and Reserves Reports are on page 33 and 34 and discussed further in this presentation. And the 5-year working capital plans for facilities and technology are reported on pages 35 and 37 of the report. Again, the report is available online at lnsu.org, as well as hard copies available at the Supervisory Union and Clerk offices. The Treasurer's Report is our audited cash as of June 30th, 2020. And we started the year with about 4.9 million, ended the year with 6.7, almost 6.6 million, or a $1.6 million increase in cash. 406,000 of it is up in the usable general fund cash category. Everything below the tax anticipation investment account are restricted reserves for specific purposes. But I'd like to point out here in the interest earned in the general fund accounts of almost 216,000. This information is driving some of our revenue estimates later on. The capital and health benefit reserves at June 30th, we had $1 million in capital reserves at June 30th and $151,000 in health benefit reserves available. The health benefit reserve is a new reserve that was established in 2020 by the voters to help fund unexpected or unanticipated costs associated with having health reimbursement arrangements and health savings accounts. Health reimbursement arrangements and health savings accounts help with the high out-of-pocket deductible costs of our health insurance benefits. The health reimbursement arrangements and health savings accounts, as well as our health benefits, are all in a line and covered or mandated under the statewide school employee, negotiated school employee benefit plan. Articles 2 through 4 are to receive from the Board of School Directors of said districts, that's us, its estimates of expenses for Lamoille North Unified Union grade schools, middle and high schools, and the Green Mountain Technology and Career Center for the ensuing year. Again, a note, since the annual report was published, we have received updated equalized pupil numbers and yield information from the Agency of Education. Therefore, the spending per equalized pupil noted below and the estimated tax rates presented later are lower than what was published. However, the budgets themselves are exactly the same as what was published and approved by the board on their January 11 meeting. You're going to see a combined elementary budget of $13,877,000. This includes $545,000 of grant-funded expenditures. Tonight, we're going to talk about the general fund expenses, the expenses not including grant-funded expenditures. Grant-funded expenditures and grant funds do not impact education spending. Education spending is what drives the tax rate. So we're looking at an elementary school level education spending of $12,146,299 and a current per equalized pupil spending of $18,462. The combined secondary budget for the middle school and high school of $14,954 for a combined ed spending at the middle and high school of $13,428 and a current per equalized pupil spending of $15,988. And a technical center budget of $3,351,000. These budgets are providing educational services, health and wellness services, transportation services, and more for 6 campuses, including the Tech Center, grades pre-K through 12, ages 3 through 18 plus, and 1,524 students as of this fall. As Kat mentioned, the average daily membership or enrollment counts for FY21 have been impacted by COVID-19 and homeschooling choices. The average daily membership drives the equalized pupil numbers used for tax purposes, tax rate generation purposes. At October 1, 2019, the modified unified school district had an average daily membership of 1613. The supervisory union-wide, there was over 1,900 students. And the legislature this past fall has created a type of hold harmless mechanism for calculating the FY22 equalized pupils by using the fall 2019 numbers and disregarding the fall 2020 numbers. This is a one-time hold harmless. These budgets also anticipate the return of all of our extra programming opportunities, some of which our students are still enjoying, but extra programming opportunities in FY22 such as dance, outdoor education, maker spaces, computer shop, literary magazine, gardening, music, art and performing arts, student clubs, athletics, student council, international studies and trips, community access, Lego robotics, junior Iron chef, and MedTech. What we'll see is a combined ed spending that the board approved on its January 11 of basically level funded of a change of negative 0.08%, a 1.02% increase at the elementary level, and a 1.07% decrease at the union school level. Again, the ed spending is the number, the education spending is the number that drives the tax rate along with the equalized pupils. So moving on to the elementary expenses budgeted for FY22, also approved by the board on January 11th, a net increase of 3.53. These are non-grant expenditures. Non-special education expenditure increases of 4.38, and later in the presentation we'll see where those health premium increases that Kat mentioned are driving some of this increase. And special education expenditure decrease of 1.67. I want to stop here for a second and explain some of this. In this line includes the supervisory union special education assessment. Several years ago, special education was centralized at the supervisory union. All expenses related to special education, except for para-educators, which remains at the local level. This $30,000 is a combination of an increase of local special education supports offset by a decrease from the supervisory union assessment. And much of the decrease, not all of it, a lot of the decrease is just general expense changes, but you'll see that some of this decrease is just shifted to the secondary level based on student enrollment numbers. But again, a modest increase of 3.53% across all the expenses for the elementary schools. We're also looking at, I mentioned earlier about the interest income. We're looking at some decent increases in general non-special education revenues. And this is sort of across the board based on FY20 actual revenues received. We saw increased Medicaid reimbursement, increased services to other schools, increased interest income, and increased miscellaneous revenues. So we feel comfortable booking a 26,500 increase or 9.8%. Special education, again, this is a little unique because we saw the expenses go down here, but we see revenues increase here. This revenue increase is directly related to the local para budget increasing at the elementary level. The supervisory union assessment is not considered when determining local revenues for special education. And again, this increase is directly related to the rate of reimbursement we saw in FY20. For total general revenue increases of 9.8%, We also, fortunately, coming out of fiscal year 20, because as of March, most extra initiatives stopped. We stopped spending on anything that wasn't directly related to providing remote instruction, for which there was some grant funds, but mostly we came out of fiscal year 20 with some decent surpluses to help us with this year's budgets. And again, early in the budget process, the state was reporting high tax rate impact for what they expected to be lost non-property revenue. So the board decided with the surpluses that were available, we should apply as much as we can to the budget to keep the tax rate down. So we're seeing a $258,000 increase in reserve funds available to apply at the elementary level. We're now looking at the change in the elementary budget expenses based on objects. Objects being the type of expense: salaries, benefits, health insurance increases, assessments, etc. The salary increase of 4.46% at the elementary level includes an increase of one full-time equivalent technology coordinator for information technology assistance and support for Eden and Waterville. For years, Eden and Waterville have shared one person, and it was not working for the last few years, and it's become unsustainable. Regardless of the demand for information technology supports has increased substantially, and you'll see later in the budget where we've also enhanced our cybersecurity, which requires more information technology supports. Our classrooms demand more information technology supports, and we just can't wait. If a classroom is not functioning properly, they can't wait until the next day when it's their turn for that support. It needs to happen immediately. So we've built this in to allow for the proper supports. Here's where you can see the health insurance increases are estimated at 10%. We're trying to offset it a little by utilizing our experience rating and some reserves created by the voters in 2020 to lower some HR health reimbursement arrangements, estimated expenses. The general expense assessment from the supervisory union is down at the elementary school. Again, the special education assessment is down at the elementary schools. You'll see a shift upwards a little bit more at the secondary level. Professional services purchased, this 9.9% here, again, is some Waterville supports that have been missing. It's mostly 5-to-1 evaluation supports at Waterville. They've been missing that for a couple years, and we have students that need those supports now. And they're legally obligated. We can't not provide them. It would be remiss of the board to not build a budget with consideration of those expenses. To not add budget line items would put the district at risk of a deficit, which doesn't help at all in future years. The next large increase on this object analysis is utilities. So some people are familiar with the news about the Hyde Park water and sewer fee restructuring that put a large burden on the municipalities in their district to the extent of 1,000% of increases, not just 100% of increases, but thousands of percents of increases. What this boiled down to us across our elementary schools was an additional $23,000 has been added to the utility lines just for the Hyde Park water and sewer. And then finally, school nutrition services. This actually, it is less, is half of the increase that we realized for the current fiscal year due to the recontracting with the Abbey Group. So we used to have and used to enjoy break-even contracts with the Abbey Group where we wouldn't pay extra for their services. However, the state of Vermont has disallowed break-even contracts effective with fiscal year 21. So for us, effective with fiscal year 21. So anytime you were ready to go out to bid for a new contract, you had to adjust from break-even to fee for service. This 15.8, 15.9% is the final adjustment on that. But again, we're looking at overall modest increase of 3.5%. Looking at the budget drivers by function is a way of looking at the increases by department, if you will. Functions function as departments. So the biggest increase by far is our direct instruction functions. Where's my little mouse so I can circle it? The 1100s and the 1200s are direct student instruction. Health benefits are driving a big part of this increase, as well as other benefits to employees, supports to instructions, and billbacks from the supervisory union. Again, with centralized services at the supervisory union, there are times when someone, such as a bus driver, their salary is housed at the supervisory union, but they also may do other work for their school. That other work, in order to keep all of their salaries on one W-2 and one report, they're paid out of the supervisory union, but we're able to identify that portion that is directly related to the school, and we can bill that back so that it's not part of the supervisory union assessment that goes across the entire district and the entire SU, but instead sits up here as a bill back. We can see the reductions, We can see the reductions based on the supervisory union assessments here. We come over, function 25 is information technology. We talked about an additional technology coordinator at Eden and Waterville, which is driving a major part of this increase. Facilities is 2,600. We talked about Hyde Park water fee structure change. Again, that's driving a big part of this, as well as for facilities, health benefits, and wages. We remain understaffed. We, particularly this year and early next year, anticipate a need for additional custodial services, just because the expectations and the standard for custodial services has skyrocketed in the last 18 months. We're looking at food services. We talked about the contract for the Abbey Group. This is where it falls in a function view. And at this point, if there's any questions, Michelle, I can stop and answer some questions.
Deb, I don't see any questions.
Okay, so everyone take a deep breath and on we go. So we're on to the middle school and high school expense budget that the board approved in January. Again, we're looking at very modest increases of 1.03%. The non-special ed increases at relatively flat, 0.24%. This is where we see the shift in the supervisory union assessment coming into the secondary level. Again, because of how our student enrollment is weighted. The secondary level held relatively stable, while the elementary level was impacted a little harder by the COVID and the homeschooling. However, the local special education supports and expenses are reduced here. So you'll see that in the opposite revenue savings coming over the middle school, high school general fund revenue estimates. The 23,000 we see here, the 3.78, is exactly the same thing as at the elementary, based on the FY20 actual revenues received. We're seeing increased interest income. We're seeing increased services to other schools income. We're seeing increased Medicaid reimbursement income and increased miscellaneous incomes. We have a reduced special education reimbursement rate here based on reduced local or educator expenses. Reserve funds applied. We have an additional $293,630,000 that we're fortunate to have that we can apply to the FY22 budget, again, to hold the overall tax impact down. We're looking at budget drivers across the secondary schools. We see again here a 10% expected increase, almost 10% expected increase in health insurance premiums, trying to offset that with the health reimbursement rate and our experience rating and the knowledge that we have some reserves to help with this line item. We're seeing the special education assessment come over with the 11.88% increase, particularly at the assessment. We also have a one-time savings in the long-term debt. This is the old high school bond that retired as of December 2020. The last payment was made in December and it's retired. We won't see the new bond expenses come on until the 2023 budgets. And I think some people who participated in the different bond discussions, both for Hyde Park and for the gymnasium renovations and auditorium and cafeteria renovations, will remember that conversation, that there would be a one-year savings. This is it, coming over. But again, ultimately a 1.03% modest increase at the middle school and high school. From a function point or department standpoint, again, the direct instruction is receiving a bulk of the cash. Health benefits are driving a lot of that, as well as student supports. We're seeing in function 2400, which is the special ed assessment. Health benefits, also drive the assessments from the supervisory level, supervisory union level. And then we can see the change in the bond, the retiring of the high school bond in function 5000, which is your long-term debts. Again, just to drive this point home again a little harder, essentially the combined education spending for FY22 remains relatively level. This was done on purpose and by design because early reports showed that tax rates would soar, and by holding the ed spending down as much as possible, we could hold those tax rates down. Fortunately, since those early reports, we've gotten additional good news about statewide non-property tax revenues coming in higher than forecast, and the legislature coming through on the hold harmless for the enrollment numbers and the equalized pupil calculations. At this point, I can take a break and we can take any questions that have popped up.
Again, there are no questions that I can see, Deb.
Okay. And again, this is a lot of information to digest. The reports are available. If you want to get a hard copy, it's available online. If you want to watch this and review the reports, and then join us again next Monday night. We'll have another opportunity. So moving on to the factors considered in building the FY22 budget. First, we were told there'd be a 3.79 forecast increase in ed spending statewide. This was from the December 1 letter from the tax commissioner to the governor and the legislature. And this information drives the statewide numbers. Again, we want to keep in mind that while we develop these budgets locally because we know what's happening in our schools, it's just our part of a statewide budget. And the tax rates have to raise enough revenue across the state to fund all education spending. They forecast a 3% increase, 0.03% increase, basically level number of equalized pupils statewide. We've talked about the average daily membership or enrollment hold harmless that is helping Lamoille North Modified Unified School District in particular, and we'll see that when we get to the tax rate calculation page. 3.75% was the forecast growth in per equalized pupil spending statewide. Since we've received the new numbers, and again, this was as of December 1st, the revenue forecasts and other information has changed since December 1st, but they have not given us, or the business managers, new percentage information. Since this 3.75% was forecast, and the work that has gone into the FY22 budget, and the additional information on equalized pupils and yield amounts, we can say that our per pupil equalized spending has only increased 1% at the elementary level, pre-K and 6th grade level, and equalized spending per pupil, equalized pupil, has decreased by 4.5% at the secondary level. And you'll see this more when we get into the detailed calculation. And finally, 1.635 in December was the forecast average state property tax. We know this has changed. The news is reporting that this has changed. What we don't have in hand for you today is what this new forecast average state property tax rate is. I can tell you that right now, currently, the Modified Unified Union School District estimated tax rate is 1.519, significantly below what was originally forecast in December. 2.74 is the forecast average state announced income sensitivity in December. Again, we don't have the updated. It is expected to update like all the other forecast tax numbers. Now, 11,385 is the new state property yield forecast. It was, as of December 1st, 10,763. Yield numbers increasing help drive down the final estimated tax rate. The yield is a denominator as far as how many dollars need to be raised per pupil spending. And to get there, they divide by this yield. Every time it goes up, the estimated tax rate goes down. So this is very good news. Additionally, the yield for the current year was 10,998. 13,572 is the state income yield. Again, this number going up helps drive the tax rate down for people whose property taxes or school education taxes, are calculated based on income rather than property value. Again, number has gone up. In December, they were reporting 12,825. This is very good news. And the yield for this year, it's even above the yield for this current tax year, which was 13.5. 18,789 is the excess spending threshold. This is the per pupil spending threshold that if school districts go above that, they pay basically double taxes as a penalty for every dollar they spend above the threshold. The FY22 threshold is $18,789. The current year threshold was $18,756. This hasn't changed significantly. There was not a lot of growth in this number. It makes it difficult when, if you have any education spending per equalized pupil that starts to hit the threshold. Again, the board did a lot of work in considering this threshold and the budget values that were put forward for the voters. In the current year and for FY22, there are no supervisory union or MUUSD towns subject to the threshold penalty. And that's been the case for years. 1.636 is the state non-residential property tax rate of I'm sorry, I got distracted. As of February 8th, December 1st, this number was 1.73. This was the 10 cents they were talking about. We now, for the current year, it's 1.628. At June 30th, 2020, there were unassigned fund balances available of $1,074,000. This is a large number, and people may be surprised. But again, I want to repeat that fiscal 2020 was not a normal year. All non-essential spending ended in March. And we focused solely on ensuring that we were providing and able to provide the remote instruction that was needed. Consequently, prior year surpluses that had been applied to the budget for FY20 weren't needed, as well as some expenses that were budgeted just were not needed. So we're returning 800,000 of the million to the taxpayers through reserves being applied to the FY22 budget. Some additional items to note for the combined budgets. Health benefits we talked about across all areas are up approximately 10%. Health insurance benefits. Elementary schools, their education spending is up only 1.02%. At the middle and high school, the education spending is down 1.07%. Across the supervisory union assessment, there's almost a 1% decrease, a 6.58% decrease for general expenses, a 2.41% increase for special education expenses. Special education, excluding the assessment across the unified district, is up less than 1%. Operation and maintenance budgets are up 4.42% combined, but this includes the increases to utilities associated with Hyde Park water fee structure changes. Information technology expenses are up 14.26%. As again, we saw at over the large budget, the dollar amount wasn't that much, but the percentage looks high. But again, this includes an additional person for Eden and Waterville to get the information technology supports they've been needing desperately. It also includes increases for enhanced cybersecurity across the district and the supervisory union, and supports for increased number of devices. We, with the advent of COVID and remote and hybrid instruction, we've had to increase the number of one-to-one devices for students, faculty, and support staff, so that at a moment's notice we can pivot. Some of this has been covered this year through COVID funds. A little bit may be covered next year, but the supports for these devices are part of our general fund budget going forward. Again, we receive a one-time benefit of the old high school debt retiring. And of that $1 million surplus that we saw on the previous page, 680 of it is being asked to be applied to the Unified School District's Capital Reserve Funds, which will be Article 10 going forward. Other considerations regarding the following estimated FY22 estimated tax rates. There's a decrease in the pre-common level of appraisal tax rate of 5.86 cents or $58.60 per 100,000 of property value. If you have a $200,000 home or tax appraised $200,000 home, that would be $116, $117. You'd see your tax bill go down if you didn't have a common level of appraisal to contend with. We'll talk about that further on in the calculations. Fiscal year 21 was the last year of the merger incentive, the 2-cent automatic rate deduction for merging, incentive for merging. FY22 does not include this. So this would have been an additional $20 reduction to the $58. The one-time average daily membership hold harmless we've talked about for calculation of equalized pupil provided by the state is helping us hold those rates down. The following key elements for homestead rate calculation, which are all provided by the state, are still preliminary at this point. I put this in every year at this point to remind people that these numbers are preliminary until the legislature votes and recesses. They pretty much hold this until the end and recess. Any one of these can change the final published tax rate for your town. The estimates you will see are estimates only. The yield numbers and the equalized pupil numbers have been going in the right direction to help those tax rates drop. Unfortunately, our common levels of appraisal, because fortunately or unfortunately, the Vermont properties have become so desirable, the market values have jumped, which has driven some of the common level of appraisal down for towns that have not had recent reappraisal in the last 2 to 3 years. If statewide budgets come in higher with spending than anticipated, the yield rate could be adjusted to increase final taxes. And again, town reappraisals, I have not heard of any of our modified unified towns going through reappraisal. Johnson just completed their reappraisal last year. But if they were to go through a reappraisal, the post common level of appraisal tax rates you'll see would change. Estimated tax rate considerations continued. Less than 50% of our modified unified school district ed spending is raised with the local property tax rate. In the current fiscal year, 11,672,000 of the education spending is estimated to be raised locally. The remaining 13,924,000 is being provided from other state revenue sources. And those are sales tax sources. I think there's some lottery funds in there. There's some what used to be called gold towns. I don't know what we call them now. So I keep falling back on that, but don't quote me because that's technically not the correct term. But towns that have general incomes high enough to support more than their portion of the state ed spending. In 2018, 73% of our modified unified school district households received tax reduction benefits through the income sensitivity calculation. So again, those income sensitivity rates changing are very beneficial to the ending tax rate. And again, our combined ed spending remains essentially level funded with the current year. So on to the estimated tax rate calculations. This is where we can see the current year budgeted equalized pupil numbers from the state at the elementary level have remained relatively steady. But the secondary equalized pupil numbers have increased, which is helping to drive down the per equalized pupil education spending. The budget numbers have not changed since they were first approved in January and published in January. The budget numbers remain the same. What's benefiting us is we now have a small reduction in per student spending at the elementary level and a significant reduction in per student spending at the high school level. Prior to the new equalized pupil numbers, we were spending $16,569 or $760 more per equalized pupil at the secondary level. We divide the per equalized pupil spending by the yield of $11,389, and it gives us an elementary rate and a secondary rate. We don't have the incentive again. We then determine what percentage of union school district students are elementary, that's all of these, and the percentage of the union school district secondary students, which is not all of these. It is all of this minus Cambridge's. And we weight out or allocate out these two tax rates based on the percentage of elementary students and based on the percentage of secondary students at the unified school district. We combine these allocated rates to come up with a 1.5193 you saw earlier. This 1.5193 is 5.86 cents less than for the current tax year, which is a $58.60 reduction per $100,000 of property tax value. Are there questions at this point before we go on to the common level of appraisal?
Deb, I don't see any questions.
Okay. So the common level of appraisal this year, or for FY22, as we mentioned, is very tricky. We talked about the education spending being basically level funded. We talked about the per equalized pupils going up. We talked about these numbers helping to hold the tax rate down. However, once we apply the common level of appraisal, and there is absolutely no control over this, there's nothing we can do to change these numbers. This is, again, a mechanism because property taxes, education property taxes, are raised on market value, not tax assessed value. And when the tax assessed value falls significantly below market value, they have to raise the tax rate by using a common level of appraisal. So they're raising the same education spending dollars. We can see, I'm going to pick on Johnson for a while. They just completed a townwide reassessment for is this the fourth budget or fifth budget I'm now presenting? For all the budgets up until this year, Johnson's common level of appraisal has really hurt. They now are as close to 100% of market value as they have been since I've been with the district, which means they're going to be able to realize a good chunk of that $58 change per 100,000. Belvedere has lost 5 percentage points, over 5 percentage points in their common level of appraisal. So they're going to see a modest increase of about $30, less than $30 per 100,000 of of assessed value. Hyde Park again has seen, almost 5%, so they're going to realize a little bit of an increase, and Waterville has seen a drop. They're going to realize a little bit of an increase. Johnson and Eden Johnson hasn't seen a drop at all. They've seen an increase, and Eden has seen a modest drop in their common level of appraisal, so they have a modest tax rate change. Again, an opportunity for questions before we move on to the Tech Center.
I don't see anything, Deb.
Okay. Green Mountain Technology and Career Center mission is to promote the mastery of the essential academic, technical, and employability skills for secondary and adult students to be successful in the workforce and to continue professional learning. The budget proposal for FY22 is showing a difference of $92,913 from $3.259 million to $3.351 million, a percent change of 2.83%, but a per pupil tuition of $8,695, which through strategic use of surplus funds and increased student enrollment and slightly increased state contributions is showing a decrease in tuition per pupil of $448. The budget notables this year, the primary drivers for the 2.83 increase is health benefit costs and modest adjustments to other benefits and personnel costs. All other program expenses have been level funded with the understanding that these levels meet most program needs. There are other programs that run that are funded through grants. At the end of FY20, the Tech Center had 393 in unrestricted reserves available. 200,000 of this has been applied to the FY22 budget, and 193,219 is requested to be applied to a new fund created designated for future tuition reductions. This is Article 12 on the ballot and on the warning. And again, we're seeing a $448 decrease per pupil's tuition, thanks to modest increases in enrollment, increases in state tuition assessment, assistance, and strategic applications of the reserve funds. The FY22 budget proposal, again, $3.351 million in expenses, an estimated including state revenues of $2.21 million revenues, leaving a $1,141,000 in tuition to be raised, divided by a 6-semester average full-time equivalent of 13120 for an $8,695 tuition assessment out to the sending schools. Again, this will be the per 6-semester average FTE charge for the sending schools, including the high school. In the budget you just saw, there was tuition funds. There have always been tuition funds for the Tech Center. This is a slide, it's very busy. It's presented each year. It shows sort of the historic data and changes in state aid, both the basic education state assistance and supplemental assistance that is received each year. It shows historic information on the 6-semester average data, fall enrollments, as well as fall enrollments, down here, semester enrollments, and the average full-time equivalent ending at 131.20 for the FY20 fiscal year calculation. And it shows some of the historic information for the per pupil tuition. We also have the pupil assessment history of the last 12 years where you can see in FY20, we hit a high of 9,821. FY21 and FY22 with increasing student enrollment, state assistance, and again, strategic application of the surpluses. We're seeing the per pupil tuition come down again. Are there any questions on the GMTCC budget at this point?
I don't see anything, Deb.
Okay. All right. So we'll move on to the ballot articles. And again, I want to harken back, it seems like quite a while ago, where we talked about this virtual annual meeting that we're now in. Some of these articles are items that would have been voted from the floor. But because we're in virtual format, we can't do floor votes with fidelity, and knowing that the voters are registered voters, as well as being sure we capture everybody's vote. So all of the usual articles, whether voted by Australian ballot, which were all the money items except for compensation, were voted by Australian ballot all along, all the budget items and reserve items. But now we've got all those floor items being voted by Australian ballot. This is a one-time authorization by the state for the board to make this decision. This would usually be done by the voters, but again, due to COVID, the state has approved the boards to make this decision for everybody's safety. Officers and directors compensation articles. Article 5, shall the chairs of the Board of School Directors be compensated $1,800 each for the school year commencing July 1? Shall the members of the Board of School Directors be compensated $1,500 each for the school year commencing July 1? Shall the district clerk be compensated $500 plus mileage for each special meeting for the school year commencing July 1? And shall the district treasurer be compensated $8,000 for the school year commencing July 1? These are the same values that were voted on for the current year. Last year at the annual meeting from the floor, the constituency voted to approve $500 a year plus mileage for the clerk, $8,000 a year for the treasurer, $1,800 a year for the board chair, and $1,500 a year for the directors. Just for reference, we looked at some similar unified school districts around us. Mount Abraham Unified School District pays their clerks $1,200, their treasurers $7,200, their board chairs $2,400, and their directors $1,200. Budget and reserve articles, which have always been voted by Australian ballot. Article 9 is the article relating to the Lamoille North Modified Unified Union School District, grades pre-K through 6, to approve the school board to expend $13,333,159, which is the amount the school board has determined to be necessary for the ensuing fiscal year. The estimates published in the articles were published prior to new information. That's why they are estimates. This language, after the question about the budget itself, is required by statute. It is also required to be clear that these are estimated values. Article 10 is an article about the voters, asking the voters if Lamoille North Modified Unified Union School District, grades 7 through 12, transfer the sum of $273,680 from the unassigned audited fund balance existing as of June 30th to the Lamoille North Modified Unified Union School District Capital Fund Reserve. Use of reserve funds can save taxpayers from the sharp peaks of unanticipated capital expenses. A boiler blows, we have a leaky roof, you know, other damages that may occur during the year that are unanticipated. Capital funds help us fix those items and address those issues in a timely basis without having to hit the general fund budget. And quite frankly, risk going into a deficit situation. Article 11, shall the voters of Lamoille North Modified Unified Union School District, grades 7 through 12, approve the school board to expend $14,854,293, which is the amount the school board has determined to be necessary for the ensuing fiscal year. Again, the estimates on the ballots are language that's required by the state. It was published before we got new information for estimates for spending for per equalized pupil. So again, what the voters are voting on is the budget. What the question is about is the budget. We'll come together again next Monday. If you find after leaving this meeting you have questions about that budget, please join us. Article 12, shall the voters of Lamoille North Modified Unified Union School District, Green Mountain Technology and Career Center, establish a special reserve fund for use for future tuition reduction needs and transfer thereto the sum of $193,218 from the unassigned audited fund balance existing as of June 30th, 2020. Use of reserve funds here can save taxpayers from the sharp peaks of unanticipated tuition increases due to enrollment changes or reduced state assistance. And finally, Article 13 is shall the voters of Lamoille North Modified Unified Union School District, Green Mountain Technology and Career Center approve the school board to expend $3,350,760, which is the amount the school board has determined to be necessary for the ensuing fiscal year. Again, at this point, are there any questions about the articles, about the difference between estimated tax rates and spending per equalized pupil and what would have been published in January?
I don't see anything, Deb.
Really?
Okay. Then there's the questions. Thank you all for attending. Please vote March 2nd. But again, this is a lot of information to absorb and digest. Fortunately, we have the information meeting next Monday night. Next Monday night's information meeting is at 6 o'clock. The link for that meeting can be found on the homepage of LNSU.org, or you can certainly call the Supervisory Union and someone can help you with information regarding that. If you'd like a hard copy of the annual report, that can be made available, but it's also available in electronic format at LNSU.org. And I thank everybody for listening and participating and hanging in there.
Can I add one thing, Deb?
Sure.
I would say that I think it's often true that people hear information and need time to process their questions. So I really do hope that people attend next Monday with any questions or observations or clarifications or anything. I think it's important to have that dialogue. And thank you so much for coming tonight for those of you who attended.
Absolutely. And Kat, I will add, for anybody who might be listening in and is not comfortable speaking up in this forum, certainly you can contact me at the Supervisory Union, ask me your questions, and anonymously I will share them at the meeting on Monday night, because the questions are good. If you've got a question, someone else has, I bet, the same question.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Deb, thank you so much for the work that you've done on
Sure.
this.
And thank you to everybody who attended and was available if questions came up. I don't see what's happening.
You
I
can
think
stop
we're ready to
sharing.
close the meeting.
So I'm just going to sit here quietly till it goes away.
Good
Nice
night.
job, Deb. It's nice to see a flat budget.
Flat budget is great. Good night, everybody.
Nice job,
Good
Deb.
night.
Good night.
Good night and great job, Deb.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you for all your support.